Kumlenen Ablak Gemara. Today's daf is Yevamos Daf Lamed Ches. This is Thursday, Yud Gimel Nissen. We are up to the Mishnah. We're continuing to discuss Shemeres Yavam, a woman who's waiting to marry her brother-in-law. So her husband Reuben passed away, and she's waiting for Shimon to marry her. And now we're going to talk about the rights, the commercial rights actually. Who has rights if she passes away? Who has rights to her estate? And we're going to learn in the Mishnah, an argument of Esham and Beshil. And we're going to learn in the Gemara 4 different approaches of how to understand the Mishnah. So the Gemara, the Mishnah starts off. Hashemeres Yavam, a woman who's waiting for her brother-in-law, Shenaflu lo nechasim. What happens that suddenly she should inherit an estate? Is Moedim Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, but both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that she has the right to sell these properties or assets. V'noisena, she has the right to give it away. V'kayim, and whatever she did remains in place. Everyone agrees. Even Beis Hillel agrees. As we'll see later what they're arguing about. Here, everyone agrees. What about Mesa? What happened if she passed on? She didn't marry yet. Shimon, her husband Reuben, passed away, and she passed on. What happens to her estate? Ma yasa, what do we do big savasa? What do we do with her ksuva? Ubenachasim hanichnasim b'yaitzima, those assets that go and come in and go out with her. A woman brings her to marriage 2 kinds of assets. One is known as nichsei tzem barzel, they are strong and steady, and one is known as nichsei meloy, the plucked assets. Nichsei tzem barzel is where you get an assessor, you evaluate the property that she brings into the estate, and whatever valuation you place on it. If they move on afterwards, get divorced, she takes that, she gets that fixed value, regardless of whether the asset increases in value or decreases or depreciates. However, a nichsei malay is she brings the assets into the marriage. The assets still belong to her essentially. The goof is hers, but the husband, to give him an incentive to make sure that he works on these assets, so we give him the payus. He has the right to the payus. So when we say hanichnasin v'yeitzima, that she brings in and it leaves with her, so obviously we're talking about nichsei malay. So what happens to these assets? Beis Shammai, and the way we understand the Mishnah right now, we're discussing the ksuva, her ksuva, and from Reuven, from her husband, first husband, and we're also discussing these assets nichsei malay. Beis Shammai says that in this case it's sort of a partial. She's partially attached to Shimon. She's partially still free. So therefore we divide everything. Yachleiku Yoshe Habal and the Im Yoshe of. So Shimon and his children, who are considered Yoshe, they're assuming the place of Reuben, her original husband, so they inherit half. But Yoshe of her family, original family, they also Yashin half. He split it right, divided right down the middle. The logic in that we'll see in the Gemara later. And Beis Hillel says no, we don't say that sort of in between, but rather nechasim becheskasim. We say that everything remains in its current state. So the ksuva where it belongs to the husband, and the husband has to give it to her, so it hasn't given it yet to her. So what's the chazaka? What's the status quo? That it's for the husband. So the cheskei yeshabal. They remain with the family, with her husband's family. The assets she brought with her. So whose assets were? They were hers all along. So therefore, the chazaka status quo that is hers. They remain with her family. But if Shimon virtually married her, then it's like any other wife, and the same laws of inheritance apply there. And as long as the ksuva is regarding the assets of the first husband, from the ksuva of the first husband. So now the Gemara wants to understand why is it that in the ratio we said that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel all agree that she has a right to sell everything, and then but if she died, then suddenly we, according to Beis Shammai, we divided him equally, and according to Beis Hillel, we look at the chazakas. What's going on here? Why is it that in the Reisha, in the first part of the Mishnah, the lay plea that there's no argument whatsoever, and everybody agrees that if the woman is still alive, she has the right to sell, she has all the rights, 100%. And why is it the Mishnah Sefer? Why is it in the Sefer when she dies, suddenly we divide her assets? We don't say the assets are still hers. What changed when she died? We don't say that the assets are still hers and goes to her side of the family. No, according to Beis Shammai, we divide it. According to Beis Hillel, we look at Chazaka. What's going on here? So comes one Ula, and he'll give the first of four different approaches to distinguish between the first part of the Mishnah, the second part of the Mishnah. Amar Ula says Ula, Reisha, the first part of the Mishnah is the Nafla, when that we're going to, difference is going to be what her relationship was with the first husband, Reuben. Was she merely engaged to her husband, Mahatayda, is still considered, Arusa, or was she married, was she in a Silla? And that is a difference in her bilus and what she actually owned. Reisha, the first part of the Mishnah is talking about the Nafla, she's merely engaged to Reuben, and therefore, because her relationship was on a lower level, and she was only engaged to Reuben, and then after Reuben died, he started inheriting all of these assets. So everyone agrees they're totally hers, and because they're totally hers, she can sell, she can donate it. No argument, Beishamai and Beisil. And the Seif is talking about the Nafla Shinasua. It's talking about that she was actually married to Reuben, and then she became a Shemeres Yom. Reuben died, and then she inherited all his assets. So when we say that, another thing that we're going to say is that a Shemeres Yavam is always one degree lower than the original husband. So if Reuben was engaged, if she was engaged to Reuben, then the Shemeres Yavam is a step lower than that. Whatever the laws are by Rusa, it's a step less. And if she was married to Reuben, then whatever the laws are by marriage to Reuben, she is a step less. So therefore, when it comes to engaged, the Shammai says there's an argument. Shammai says if a woman is engaged, can she still sell her property? Does she still have total control of her property? According to Shammai, she still has total control. According to Basil, she does not. But if she did, then the sale is a valid sale. But she shouldn't look at chila. But a shemeres yavam is a step lower, so that's why Basil is made. In the case of a shemeres yavam, the chatchila she can sell if she merely was engaged to Reuben. However, it makes it like a suffix Arusa that was one step lower than an ordinary Arusa. And Zika Nesua, and if she was a Zika of a Nesua, then she's again Oisa suffix Nesua. She's one step lower than that. So therefore, by a Nesua, everyone agrees that if she's married to Reuben, she has no right to sell the properties. If she sells the properties, the husband can step in and take them all back, retrieve them from the buyers. So the Zika's Nesua is a step lower than that. And so therefore, according to Bishamai, because it's a step lower than that, it's sort of like we call it a suffix, and therefore it's partially the husband's and partially hers. So we divide it right down the middle. Because the Esau can now explain it. Zika, in the case of Arusa, the Zika is one step lower. And we're calling it a suffix Arusa. What we really mean is that it's one step lower. And the Isaac, you can't say there's no Arusa at all. There's definitely ties because she needs a chalitza. So therefore, obviously, there's definitely ties. The Isaac Arusa, if you can tell me that's definitely said there's no difference in Zika Arusa and Arusa, they're the same state, is a massive question. How can Beis Hillel say she has a right to sell the properties in this particular situation? We know that a woman who was engaged, according to Beis Hillel, she cannot sell the properties because her husband has certain rights. But the Ebed, if she sold it, it's all right. And yet, she says it works. Must be there's a step lower. But now we look if a property fell into her shoes after she got engaged. But she has a right to sell it. She has no right to sell it. But everyone agrees that it works. Elish Mamanos approve Zika Sarusa Oisa Safek Arusa. Clear that a Zika is one step lower. It only makes it a Safek Arusa. Okay, so therefore, the first part of the Mishnah is talking about such a situation. She's only engaged. Then these assets fell in afterwards. Well, she was a Shemeres Yavam, so it's a step lower. And because it's a step lower, everyone agrees that she can sell. The next part of the Mishnah, we have a Machlekes B'Sham Mitzil that we divided the way they look at the status quo. Zika's Nesua. When it comes to the Zika of a Nesua, of a marriage, Isa suffering Nesua, the Zika of a Nesua is one step lower than a Nesua. Because in other words, if she was married to Reuben, she's married and then she sells it, Reuben can step in and take it all back. Now that Reuben died, and she's only only a Zika, and because it's only a Zika, and this estate fell into her after Reuben died, not while Reuben died. Because Reuben died, then it would have been, then Shimon just steps into Reuben's shoes. Talking about the estate fell in after Reuben died, and then The Zika is a step lower. The control that Shimon has is a step lower. So that's the Machlei B'Sham Beisil. And how do I know that? How do I know it's a step lower? Because if you're going to say, if you can tell me that it was definitely because it's like the same state as if in marriage. So what do you mean? Bisham, I said what? That you divided down the middle, but nan we learned elsewhere. What if any in the chassim fall into her possession after she was married to her husband? Everyone, basically they all agree. Even b'di'evet, she sold it. The husband can intercede and take them all back. They take them all back. So it must be that a zika of a nesuya is a step less than nesuya. So Shimon, the Yevam's rights are less, and therefore Shammai says you divide it, and Hill says look at the chazaka what it was till now. El shmam and a zika nesuya is something nesuya. So that's Ula's distinction. So Ula's distinction basically learns the chiluk between the first part of the mission. The second part of the mission is if she was merely engaged to her first husband or she was married to her husband. And these assets fell into her after her husband passed away. And then the question, and therefore that's why the mission has two different parts. Rabba is not satisfied with that. He said like this. Rabba, if that's the whole difference, the difference is if she was married or she was engaged, why are the arguing a case about that the case where she passed away and what happens to the assets? No, but you're telling me it makes no difference about her status, whether she's alive or whether she's dead. The only thing that matters is whether she was engaged to her first husband or second. So why does the Mishnah have to introduce a new variable which has no bearing on the outcome of this case? Because the same thing would be as well, even if she's alive, and what rights does she have alive? The property belongs to her, but the paytas belong to her husband. So therefore, again, so what happens to these paytas? And she sold these rights according to Beishamai. We split that the inheritance. It is split half and half because it's a step lower than in the sewer. What we call and according to Basil, you leave everything chazaka. Elam Rabba, says Rabba. I'll tell you another distinction, nothing to do with the difference between engaged and marriage. Elam Rabba, is both talking about that they were married. She was married to Reuven, and then was a shemeres yavam. She was a zika of marriage. Navas, the zikas nesuya is a nesuya, and everyone agrees that a zika of nesuya is one step lower. The chiluk between the reisha and the seifa is exactly what the Mishnah says, whether she's still alive or whether she passed away. Reisha is talking about the iyekaimer. The reisha is talking about she's still alive. Because she's still alive, and now she's merely a shemeres yavam, so she's definitely a vade. Why? Because the property in the nichsim definitely is hers. It is her property. What about ksuba? We'll get to it soon, because the ksuba are the assets of the husband. But right now we're talking about the nichsim alayk. The nichsim alayk is definitely the husband, is definitely her property. So she is a vade. She has a part in the property. Venus suffix, and the husband's family is merely a suffix. And we have a rule: ain't suffix meishem nevada. And therefore a suffix cannot take out of a vada, and that's why she has to, if she sells it or gives it away, she has total control. But Sefer, the end is talking about the Mesa. The end is talking about where she died. And because she died, so now they're coming to claim the property, she's no longer around, based on the Yerusha. So, and they're both coming to claim the Yerusha. The Yavam is coming to claim the Yerusha from her, and she said, she was a zika of his. And her side of the family is claiming the Yerusha. That's theirs. Now there's a suffix. And the suffix is how strong, how powerful is this bond of this zika? Is it considered as if they're married already to Shimon, therefore Shimon's family inherits? And her original family has no rights to it whatsoever. Or it's not like she's married, and therefore the original family gets the Yerusha. And therefore what do you do whenever there's a suffix? Each one comes to claim the heritage. Therefore you divide it in the middle. Says the Gemara. Says the Gemara, and Basil disagrees. He says, well, with the suffix, you always go after the chazak. And what do you call it? Abaye asked the question. Well, Beshama, you're telling Beshama ain't suffix much levada. According to Beshama, you're telling me the suffix does not take away from the vada, and that's why. No, but even though the woman's vada, she definitely belongs to her. You said before. and therefore she has the right to sell because Safi does not take from Bavada. So let me ask a question. We learned Nafal Habayis Olav Al Abi. There was a child and a father, and the house collapsed, and they both perished in that collapse. And the question is, who died first? The nafkamina is, so who inherited it first? If the father died first, then the child inherited the father, and the child and then his Yoshim are the ones who inherit, or the child at first, the father Yashim the child, and then his Yoshim take over. So what happened was Nafla Olav Alavi, Olav or on him, or anybody else who inherits to him. For Olav, and on the child, there was a few different other outstanding loans. There was a Ksuva's Isha, the Ksuva of a wife, and the Baal Chayim was a lender. So Yosha, I mean, the Yosha of the father obviously tiny without knowing for sure, but this is their argument. Ben makes decision the child out first, and therefore forget the Baal Chayim, forget the Ksuva, it goes straight directly to the father. The Achim as of then the father died, so we Yashin and we take it all over, and the Baal Chayim, you have no say in it whatsoever because it's our money now and we don't owe you anything. Baal Chayim argues maybe no. The father died first, and the Achim may have been afterwards. The son died, and therefore the son inherited the father, and then therefore I have every right to collect my chayv. His Beis Shammai says, Beishamai says in this case, we don't know who's right. You divide. And Basil says, the chosim b'cheskosim. Do everything the way it is. Now, in this case, the Yershim of the fathers of Adai, because they're coming with a definite time. They definitely inherit their father. What do you mean? Because even if the father died first, and the son Yashim the father, they nevertheless, because they inherit their father, they'll also ultimately end up inheriting the son because it's their brother. So they are Avada Yosh. The Baal Chayv is questionable whether he has something at all. Because if the father, if the son predeceased the father and the father Yash and everything, then he has nothing. So the Baal Chayv is a suffix, they're Avada, and yet Bishama says you divide equally. So what do you tell me the first part of the mission is talking about? Why do you have Leiku? Because the suffix and Avada, and she's Avada, and that's why she can sell anything else. But Bishama holds that doesn't matter. Even the suffix has right, so we divide equally. Because you tell me divide equally. Comes along the Gemara says a new word. The reason why a Baal Chayv is also considered a Vada. Why is he a Vada? Because that since there's a contract with two witnesses, it's that strong that it's as if he's already collected. It's not called Mechusa Gavayin, you still have to go through ordeal because any bezin automatically is going to okay it. You have a star with 280. And therefore it's as if he collected already, so he's already a Muchzik. He's as much as a Vada as they are. Says the Gemara. And therefore, if the son, for example, outlived his father and he would yashin his father, then the collect it instantaneously. It's his already. Therefore, it's a suffix and a suffix who died first, and that's why they divide equally. So how do we know Bisham holds the svara that it started as if it's collected? Now we let the Mishnah. Let the Mishnah say to Mesu, let's say a woman who was accused of being a saita, but before she had a chance to drink the water to prove her innocence, Mesu Baleim, her husband who warned her, and so on and so forth, died. Actually, Shasu, before she had a chance to drink, so we can't prove one way or another. Is Beishame, and Beishame says, now there's a doubt here, maybe she was Mazana, if she had an adulterous affair, she forfeits her ksuba. So we don't know what happens, it writes a suffix. Beishame says, Nightly ksuba, so they have every right to collect the ksuba, the Einan Shaisis, they don't have to drink. And Basil says, Oy Shaisis, Oy Loy Nightly, either they drink, and then they can collect the ksuba, or not, they don't take it off. So they don't take it. So before the Gemara moves on, the Gemara says, how can you give her to drink when the husband passed away? It says a positive behavior. Only the husband can bring it to drink. But like you don't have that. Because she doesn't drink, she does not get her ksuba. But Beishama, the point that we're trying to focus on here, Beishama says she has every right to take ksuba, but she's a suffix. She's a suffix. The suffix who, what's a suffix? Suffix anoi. If she was mazana, she forfeits a ksuba. Suffix lays anoi. She didn't mazana, and yet osi suffix might be the and she will. She goes ahead and collects the ksuba. Now the assets are sitting with her husband, so they have a chalukah. They're the vadai. She has a suffix. She's entitled to it or not, and yet she takes away from the husband. Elish mam doesn't approve. Must be that she's not a suffix because the ksuba is as if she already collected it as well. And now, as soon as the husband died, the ksuba sits with her. And now the Yarshim, if they're saying, no, maybe you're Mazana, you forfeit the ksuba, they're the ones who are being mighty from her because she already had it. Because once you have a ksuba, it's as if it's hers. And the suffix cannot take away from a vada. So that's the new approach because Kigovidami turns it into a vada. Says the Gemara. Abaye, in fact, Abaye, who did not know of this halach of Shtara Oim B'Li Govidam, at this juncture later on he changed his mind, but right in the Gemara says, but right now he didn't know about it. Is Loisrim her? Why, in fact, doesn't he bring a proof from here? Let him bring a proof from here that that we see that a suffix is Moitzah Nevada because she entitled the Ksuva, and he didn't know the reason is because she's like Havada because Shtara Oim B'Li Govidam. So the Gemara, he thought that maybe Ksuva is different. We're gonna treat her differently. Mishum China, we want women to be happy to get married. And if we every time there's a dispute or there's a suffix, she forfeits a Ksuva, people won't want to get married. So we're making it easy on her. That's why you don't want to use that as a proof. So the Gemara, Ksuva the Masnisim. What about now Mishnah? You see clearly from here that Beishamai says Yachleiku in our Mishnah. It says right here, what about the Ksuba and the Chosim and the Chosim, Yitzibah, B'Shamai says you divide it equally. So we see clearly again, Sophic takes out Mavadai. Says the Gemara, Loi Pligi. The Mishnah is not discussing, when B'Shamai still argue, they're not talking, even though you introduced it by talking about the Ksuba, this argument only deals with the Nichsim Aloi. The Gemara, it says clearly in the Mishnah, Mesa, if she died, Ma Yasib Ksuba, so what do we do with the Ksuba, over the Chosim and Chosim, what do we do that? B'Shamai Emi Yachleiku, B'Shamai say you divide Yeshav Mishra, but it still says the Chosim Chazkasim. So it's clearly that it's discussing the Ksuba as well, and she's a suffix. So you Hachikam, this is what you mean. Mesa, this is how you read the Mishnah. Ma Yasib Ksuba, so what do you do with the Ksuba? And then it was a rhetorical question, V'Shavka. The Mishnah let it alone, let it aside, and didn't bother responding to it. V'Shavka, and then the Chosim Hanichnosim Yeshim. Now the Mishnah continues. B'Shamai says Yachleiku divided Yeshav Yeshav, because both equal suffix and the Chosim Chazkasim. Ravashi says, so this is how Rabbah learns. So Rabbah learns the distinction in the Mishnah is not whether she was engaged to the first husband or she's married. The distinction is whether she's still alive, and then this because she's the Vadai, therefore she has a right to do whatever she wants. Somebody does not pull out a Vadai, or when she is dead, and then the two equal suffix. Whether a Zika makes her like she's married and not married, if you divide equally, and Basil says leave it a Chazak. Amar Rabashi, Masis Namedek, proves in the Mishnah itself. It turns the Mishnah, Yachleiku, Yoshe Baal, and Yoshe Av. The main people are the Yoshe Av, and the Yoshe Baal step in and they also take a share. Why? When do the Yoshe Av, like Tanan say Yoshe Av and Yoshe Baal? Now, what are the main rights of the Yoshe Av? It's the Nichsim Malaik. When it comes to the Ksuba, the assets are with the husband, and they have to pay it out to the wife. Because it says the Yoshe Baal joined the Yoshe Av, it's clearly what are we talking about? The Nichsim Malaik originally belonged to the Av family, to her original family. Like Tani Yoshe Av and Yoshe Baal. We're only focusing now on Nichsim Malaik. So that's approach number 2. The distinction is whether one is alive or she's dead. Come along, Abaye says, no, I'll give you a third way of how to understand the difference shot in our Mishnah. And he goes this way, one of the Chilul Dereisha, the Sefer Dereisha, everyone agrees that she can sell. And why in the Sefer we have a Machlekes, whether it's Yachleiku or whether it's Chazaka. Nothing to do with the fact that she's still alive or now that she's dead. It's talking as follows. Reisha depends when the assets came into possession. Reisha the Nafula Kishihisha Medes Yav. In the Reisha talking about when did the assets come into possession while she was waiting for Shimon, and because waiting for Shimon doesn't have such strong rights, and therefore she's much stronger. She's sort of half independent, so she can outright sell it the Chatchila or give it away. And if she dies, her Yerushin take over because the Zika is not strong enough to have an effect on that. But Sefer is talking about the Nafel of Shitachul Abal. There's talking about the assets fell into her possession when she was married to Reuben. And because it came into possession, married to Reuben, and the argument is going to be, what are the rights of Reuben to her, the assets that she brings into the marriage? He's the husband. The husband and the wife are equal partners in the assets that brings into the marriage, or the husband's rights are stronger than hers, even though she's the one who inherited, bringing the marriage because of all the takanas, we're learning more ksubas of the husband. We want him to take care of his wife. Then yodai is not equal to yodah. On the contrary, yodai adif mi yodah, and the difference would be while she is a shemeres yavam, it's always a step lower. So if you're going to learn that his hand is stronger than hers, when shemeres yavam, they're equal. If you learn that while she inherited assets while she was married, Yodai ki Yodah, they're both equal, then Shemeres Yavam is a step lower than that. And that's going to be the Machlekes Beisham Beisel. So Abaye holds that Yodai ki Yodah. And that Basil says that what? That even though she broke the marriage and it goes back to the Chazaka, Abaya holds that while she was married, when these assets came into possession, their husband and her are equal, no stronger. So therefore, when she died, when the husband died, and now she's the Shemeres Yavam, all the Shemeres Yavam have, all the Yavam has is only a Zika, just one step lower. So therefore, the Nechasim are in the Chazaka. And so that's why Beishamai Hillel says, leave it the Chazaka. Beishamai holds no, that Yoda is stronger than Yoda. By Zika, they're both equal. And therefore, you divide it halfway. The partners now, by Shemeres Yavam, they're merely equal partners. So you divide it half and half. And that's what Abai explains it here. So Abai explains basically the question is when the assets came into possession. That's a good relation to say for the Reisha came into possession when she was a Shemeres Yavam, so she's in total control. And the same we're talking about, she came into possession while she was married. And the Machlekes B'Shamai still is if the husband and her are equal partners, then Shemeres Yavam is a step lower than that. That's Basil, leave everything in Chazaka status quo. And according to B'Shamai, the husband is stronger, and therefore the Shemeres Yavam they're equal, and that's why he just split down the middle. But the Rava doesn't agree with this. This is a fourth approach because Rava holds that in fact the halach is that Yoda Yadifa. So how come Basil says that means that Shemeres Yavam should be equal? So Basil also should be made that Basil should say that they should divide it equally. So Rava has a fourth approach. Rava says Rava even if the Baal, if let's say she came into possession of these assets while she's married to her husband, then everyone is no argument. The Yodoi Adifa mi Yodoi. I hold that according to everybody, the husband has stronger rights. So while she's a Shemeres Yavam, they're equal. Then Basil will be made you split equally down the middle. What happened was that no, all the assets fell to her, not while they were married, but while she was a Shemeres Yavam. So what's the chiluk in the relation? Say for why the relation she has total control. Relation, the love of my the Zika is so weak. So the relation, nothing after there were no overtures from Shimon to her, and therefore she's in total control. She can sell and donate and do whatever and give it away. It's all hers. But Sefer, and the Sefer is talking about the Ova B'Maimer. So in other words, he says if the assets came to her while she's married, the future husband has no rights at over ever. But he did a Maimer. Which is and the Maimer we had before in Machlekes B'Shamai holds that a Maimer is very powerful, and therefore B'Shamai holds Maimer is Koyin Mahatayim. According to one version we had previously. Hold that Maimer B'Shamai Oise Vada Yarusa B'Safing Shua. That B'Shamai says that a Maimer definitely does no. The first part of the Mishnah there was no Maimer, so she has total control. The second part was there was a Maimer. According to B'Shamai, Maimer makes it totally Yarusa and a step lower than in a Sua. On the one hand, she's totally engaged to the person. So therefore, if let's say the whole story having married for 3 brothers, and then 2 sisters married to Reuben and Shimon, and then Levi made a Maimer, and then Shimon died. So the tzara of the wife of Shimon now is totally free according to B'Shamai, because the Reuben's wife of the sister is already considered married. Rusa engaged to Levi, and therefore this is the sister of Ishtai, and therefore she's totally free. So as far as Achos Ishtai, it's considered a total relationship. But in the Safing Nesua, when it comes to other dinim, they're only considered like a Safing Nesua, a step lower, and therefore Lachlik Nechasim, all they can do is they divide the Nechasim. And Masheng Misal agree that Maimah does that, and that's why he says go after the Chazak. That the difference between the first part of the mission, the second part of the mission is as a Shemeres Yavam, nothing happens if the assets fell. And then we're talking about a Maimer took place. So that's the Machlekes B'Shamai, the strength of a Maimer. So that's what Rabbi Loza says. Like a vaya, that the question is, when did these assets fall into them? Did it come while she was married to Reuben, or did it come while she was waiting? That the Reish is talking about it came into possession while she was a Shemeres Yavam, and therefore she's total control. And the Sefer is talking about it came to possession while she was married to her husband, and the argument is whether Yoda ki Yoda or Yoda Adifim Yoda. Says how can you tell me that? How can you tell me Rabbi Loza said that? Rabbi Loza says that Maimer B'Shamai ain't no koine. Rabbi Loza clearly holds that even according to B'Shamai, and we had this before, a Maimer is not really koine. So how can you tell me that that Rabbi's whole word that Maimer is koine, and therefore it makes it almost like a nesuya, and that's why he divided equal? It wasn't hold of that. In fact, the only thing that he said according to B'Shamai, what Maimer achieves is that Shimon's wife, the Achos Ishtai, no longer is a free woman because her sister had a Maimer. So you're right. Swap the names around. Or You don't swap the reins around. Ki amri ana. When I said previously, the lesagila beget. I said previously that maimed is kind of, it doesn't make a full thing, is only regarding that if the lady made a maimed to the shemeris yavam and then decided to divorce, you can't just give her a get and say goodbye because you were totally married to me. All you did was a maimed. So I said that even according to Beishamai, if let's say you made a maimed, which prevents the sister from marrying, but if you made a maimed, then you decide to divorce her, a get is not enough. You need to give her chalitza. But I never got involved in the commercial side of things to say that what a maimed does not make it as if it's Shimon's and therefore he has rights to it. Papa says that in fact our Mishnah comes out according to Baya. And even though the difference is that the Reish is talking about that the assets fell into her while she was a Shemeris Yom, and therefore she has total control. And the Sefer is talking about that the assets fell while she was married to Reuben. The argument is whether Yoda ki Yoda is stronger than Yoda. The Avagav the Kasha Mesa, even though it's a little bit problematic according to Baya. So why does the Mishnah introduce the fact she's alive but she's dead? That's totally irrelevant. What matters is when the assets came into her when Reuben was alive or Reuben was dead, not whether she was alive. The Tani, it says in the Chosim, even though it's a problem, Mesa, but I'll tell you why the Mishnah seems to support Abaya, because it totally talks about the Nechasim that comes in and goes out with her, which is basically the Nichse Melug. My nichnasim, my yotzim. What do you mean going in and going out? Lav nichnasim l'shusabal, as property that she brought into the rishus of the husband. The yotzim l'shusabal goes out of the husband. So clearly, the Sefer is talking about a case where while she was married, she brought some things into the marriage, and that's the question. So like Abaya, that the first part of the Mishnah is talking about that she brought things in when the husband already was dead. She was a shemeres yavim, and the second part of the Mishnah is talking about while she was married, and therefore nichnasim of the yotzim. L'shusabal avagav the kasha mesa, and even though we have a problem with Mesa. Why is it relevant of that? And the miflaga begufa, why talk about the property itself after she died? We could have talked the same question we had before that Rabbi asked Anula. We can ask Anabai as well. Let's talk about her while she's alive and regarding the Paris, which the only part that goes to the husband is the Paris, and discuss that whether she can say who gets it. The Sulay Midi, that doesn't matter. That's a little bit of a problem, but the Mishnah clearly seems to indicate that Abai is right. We're talking about that she was married to her husband, and that's the chiddush of the Sefer. The Ima goes into the husband, and therefore Abai's distinction is correct. So even though Abai and Rabbi are arguing here, we have a rule that 6 times the halacha is like Abai Yal Kegam. Many poskim hold that the halacha here is like Abai as well, because Rapapa agrees with him, and this doesn't come under the banner of Yal Kegam, because if other Amoraim rule like Abaya, that's outside of that rule that we gave. Others disagree. Halacha should still be like Rava. This ends today's Gemara. We'll continue tomorrow, Mr. Shem.